Okay, so I want to make a video to show people, show the world, show YouTube what I do to manage my emotionally difficult experiences or emotional challenges that I commonly experience with schizophrenia, with my diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, actually. So, first off, as a preface, I haven't taken any medicine, any medication for probably since 2012. Prior to that, I always attempted to stop taking my medication on my own. I didn't have any support in trying to do that. And there came a point where I just couldn't handle internalizing it, keeping it to myself. It's a huge thing, huge decision to take on in isolation, and that usually would kind of tip me over. I would experience increased at first I would experience feeling better, like I'm doing what I wanted to do. I feel relief, I feel better. And then, after the days pass and I'm internalizing this huge issue, this huge decision, keeping it from my parents. I'm living with my parents at the time. That's usually after a few days, it starts getting very difficult. And how it has been, like on a regular basis, in terms of trying to get off medication in those specific times, which I've attempted like 5 times or so overall throughout my initial period of being diagnosed or being hospitalized, actually. So yeah, I would usually turn to my parents for emotional support, for help, and the reaction that I would get from them was actually quite painful. It was actually very much a sense of I would experience a sense of loss of my like self empowerment that I got from my own autonomy, being able to make the decision for myself. And so at the time I was like 25 years old, and 24, 25 or so. And so yeah, that was usually it was because of how my parents reacted, the things, what they would think of what I was doing, very critical, very much against my decision. All that had a strong negative effect on how I was feeling. So it like pushed me even further into hardship. And so actually that was kind of a reason why throughout all those times, I never felt comfortable, or it was kind of difficult to like, I really had to get to that point where I just couldn't handle anything anymore. And then I would go and like ask help from my parents. And then, every single time I was met with the kind of the same mentality. And after like, I think after like the second time of doing that, or the first time of doing that, um, uh, I try to have a conversation with my dad, like a very rational conversation. After I had spent like pretty much almost a year uh, learning about different aspects of my potential emotional challenges that I was experiencing. I had a lot of support from YouTube, from social media. There was a channel called Psyche Truth, and they would have a lot of guest speakers on there. And actually, one of the guest psychologists that came on that show, he he was practicing for like a period of a month or so as a visitor in my local psychiatric hospital that I would frequently end up in. So yeah, he was practicing there for, I think it was actually a period of like 3 months or so. And so his perspective is not so much on the chemical model of psychiatry. It's more on the trauma model, where as a result of like something emotionally traumatic, it's kind of messing with your chemistry, and that's kind of the effect. That's what's causing your unbearable experience. It's not so much just purely focused on the chemical side of things. And in all respects, in all reality, that's kind of how psychiatry works in general. It usually comes as a package going to go see the doctor that prescribes medicine alongside with a doctor that is, talk therapy, a therapist. And that's generally what's recommended. But if you just kind of focus on one side of it, on the psychiatry part of it, that's very much just purely focused on, just the chemical side of things. And it also, too, in my experiences of seeing a doctor, it was usually difficult. Really difficult to like really express and say everything in its entirety. Usually it's just like I would say the main points, and after just like maybe 3 or 4 sentences of talking, the doctor would kind of okay, so maybe we'll try this. It sounds like you have a psychotic disorder. And so really there's no like personal side of the story that I'm able to get into. Also, personal things in general, like you can't really talk about stuff that's very personal so openly just within one visit. And from my kind of perspective, that kind of is maybe part of the reason why I would consider going to see a talk therapist before seeing an actual like doctor that prescribes medication, to kind of develop your personal dialogue a little bit better, so that you have a better tools of communication when you go to that visit with a medicine prescribing doctor. So yeah, and even then, I think there's a good reason for there to exist, significant challenges when it comes to communicating with a doctor. Things that might not be culturally, or might be culturally rejected, especially in context of sexuality and sexual orientation. There might be significant issues there that make it very hard to feel like you could talk to a doctor without a sense of cultural, social bias that is just inherently potentially there. And so, it's up to your, decision which doctor you choose. But I think ultimately it's also a little bit maybe embarrassing, I guess, or it feels a little bit uncomfortable to, tell the doctor or to kind of, make a decision instead of relying on what the doctor's telling you. I don't know. That's how like I was before in general. You just kind of, if a doctor tells you something, you don't just kind of like, it's kind of weird to ask for a second opinion. It almost feels like a little bit of betrayal in a sense. So it might be a bit emotionally challenging for certain people to even, take that next step. And I think like that's not something that maybe taking the next step isn't really so much something that you want initially to do, like in the sense of like a second opinion. I think it only comes really realistically after like you have some really bad experiences with like the medical decisions, the diagnosis, and it leads you to a lot of hardships, which really just kind of prompts you to want to seek a different opinion. And so, for a very long time, I was trapped. I was experiencing a sense of feeling like I just, I don't really have any say in my life. I'm just like stuck to exist in this experience that where everyone perceives me is different than how I perceive myself. And so that perspective mostly is in context of the first person experience of my, like what I actually experienced in my, in a period where I was practicing, or I wanted to try fasting, so fasting from food. So I wanted to try that as an alternative, and I learned about it over a period of months, and I decided I reached the point where I had experienced I don't know how to just so simply say psychotic symptoms, because from my experience of it outside of knowledge of psychology, it was something it's no different than the typical religious experience that I was familiar with through, through my religion. It was just kind of a typical, the typical components of that type of experience. But the difficult aspect of the experience was kind of what the voice of, I guess initially I thought of it as the voice of God, but then listening to what the voice is saying, it became apparent that that is not, I guess, apparently God. It seems like it's just a regular, a man's voice with a sense of authority. So that's part of it. But what the voice said was something relating to sexuality. And basically I liked someone in class and she had a boyfriend, and it was kind of it was actually a significant distraction, or I don't like to call it a distraction because I'm not really focused on school at that point. I'm more focused on having meaningful relationships in my life, my emotional health, my mental health. And school in general was something that I usually had a lot of difficulties in that aspect of my life. I always kind of got made fun of and kind of bullied in school throughout my experience. And actually a lot of it's just something that had a significant emotional weight throughout my experience. And college, kind of when I was in college, when that spiritual or when that religious experience happened, college, I don't know, it's just kind of, you expect it to be a little different than high school. But it was really just kind of people from high school just kind of in the next step in college. And it's really not that different. It was pretty much, there is people that are more serious there, but they're still kind of the same crowd that exists there. And I don't know, also I was socially awkward. I just felt very uncomfortable. I think it was actually that happened after one situation in the library where I guess the librarian was hitting on me, and it made, I was very uncomfortable by that situation. She was kind of very aggressive, and it felt a little bit weird. I didn't want to kind of reject her. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but also there's a sense of this is kind of intense and uncomfortably so. And so I tried to avoid walking through the library area just to not kind of cross paths with that person the next time. And that actually, I think that was part of the reason why I kind of started walking towards the perimeter of the school to get to my class. And that's kind of where I encountered a lot worse social situations, like maybe a drug sale. And one time it was a little bit suspicious passing by some guys that looked like they were doing a drug sale. And then after passing by them several times, they kind of got aggressive. One of the guys became very aggressive. And they just kind of, and I was growing intensely uncomfortable around them. And I think they kind of identified that sense of suspicion that I had in passing by them, that emotional disposition for suspicion. And that just kind of triggered them even more. And so they tried to, one of the guys said something really violent, I think a death threat or something like that. And so that was really scary for me. And then, so that happened maybe not even months, 2 months. And it was more than just that. There's a number of I think I encountered someone, or maybe the same people in the parking garage or near that area or something like that. I forgot. And so yeah, I experienced something that was it was a combination of feeling like a religious experience, but at the same time, the content of the experience, what was said by the voice that was coming from up above, and for that specific circumstance where I was deciding to leave class because I just couldn't focus in school, and I just thought I need a break from school. And that was a decision that I was kind of building up over a period of weeks. And it was that class where I felt that attraction towards that girl walking in there, and she kind of reciprocated that by smiling. And then her boyfriend's there. I wasn't sure if it was a boyfriend her cousin or her brother. I have no idea. And so I tried to shrug off that discomfort by entertaining those alternatives. Uh, and so I just kind of said hi, I think, one time, and then she really got like I could see her blush face, and I think that was kind of the starting of some emotional conflict between her and her partner that was sitting next to her boyfriend. And so they weren't at school. They didn't go to class that time that I decided I just couldn't focus on class anymore. They were not there, and so I was just, and that they didn't show up the next time, the next class after that. So that kind of amplified the reality that there was conflict there. And so I couldn't focus in class anymore. I decided I just need to take a break. This is the third time I took this class. And so I decided that, and the teacher was even, I think I distracted the teacher's attention and focused. The teacher focused on me, and the teacher expressed an emotional upset towards me, which was also very embarrassing. And I couldn't even accept that the teacher was like speaking to me like in such a way that was like hurtful to me on an emotional level. But I mean, in general, I remember throughout my experiences in school, because I just mostly social conflicts in school that had happened to me similarly. A similar experience happened in an English class in high school. I think it was like I was in my sophomore year, and I just couldn't focus, and I was biting my nails all the time. And the teacher, just like I had a magazine, I think Popular Science or Popular Mechanics or something like that. I just kind of put it in my book, and I was looking at it, and I was flipping the pages, like as a kid, a teen, not realizing that the pages sound totally like a magazine, and the teacher is hearing that, and I'm thinking I could hide it in my book. But that I was wrong. And so yeah, the teacher really got angry, and she scolded me in a way that really hurt and really made me extremely embarrassed and feeling humiliated amongst my peers. And the sense of anger that she had towards me, there was a sense of justification that, like, in hindsight, I kind of look at that and I see that sense of justification that teachers tend to have towards that. And I don't think that's right. I think that's a form of maybe something that's been socially accepted for such a long period of time that people are just kind of insensitive to the reality that that kind of stuff really does have a negative effect on, especially maybe some kids, some people more than others. And it's just no different than slavery or any other thing that society becomes emotionally habituated towards, to normalize. And I think as people, we have a humongous capacity to kind of disassociate from things, especially the worse it is, the stronger the potential for disassociation. That's just how trauma works. It's like that's just an inherent condition of trauma. Is like awareness and trauma usually don't come together like in the same context. They don't function together. So I think that's a huge or challenge aspect of our society that is inherent to just like our human nature, I guess. So yeah, I had some bad experience. I actually had met a really good friend as a result of that experience in my English class in sophomore. I that was the first time I started talking to a seat partner or person that was sitting to the side of me, and just kind of I noticed she would always bite her knuckles and all her knuckles. I noticed her hand. I just remember one time I just kind of looked in her direction, and I saw her hands were like all white, and I was like, "What's wrong with your hands?" I was like, "Oh, I just bite them." And then I'm like, "Oh, I'm always biting my nails. I'm always biting the skin off my nails." And she's like, "Oh yeah, I always bite the skin off my knuckles." And and so like all these like scar tissue, all this like white on all her knuckles. And so she was an Asian girl, and she seemed very intelligent, very smart. And I just felt the sense of mutual understanding and emotions, what our emotional state was. Like, especially because Asian families tend to be more strict and more kind of coercive towards like schooling and stuff like that. So it's understandable that that could be an effect of that. And so yeah, So yeah, fast forward in college, I'm having that religious experience. The classmates that were in my class, they didn't show up to class the next class, and I decided to leave class. I just couldn't focus. I need to focus on myself before I even think that I could focus on school or learning anything. I really need to kind of go into my emotional state and do things that help me emotionally. And so I was already planning this out for a pretty long period of time. I was already going back to school and just giving it another try and seeing how it works. Maybe taking classes that I felt more, that I really wanted to take, but also too a condition of me going back to school. There was a component of coercion to it, where my parents had basically they threatened me. They said that either I go to school or I go to work because I cannot stay home and do nothing and smoke pot all day. That's what I used to smoke pot, and so uh, there's a sense of justification to their mentality, which I feel creates a huge conflict of perception as to like my personal experience. Like it justifies it. Like there's a sense of disconnect between me as a personally experiencing something that's just a hardship and like the sense of that's justified. It doesn't feel like it's I think there's a sense of just unawareness that was part of it. And also too, I view I see that I was self-medicating because I wanted to feel better, because maybe there's a lot of things in my experience, especially like especially in context of maybe scolding that I might experience on a regular basis from my dad, or even like my mom, in the form of her reinforcing that my dad's actions were right, and so that hurts too. And so yeah, there was there were things, emotional challenges that I was just kind of normalized to. And but when after I was diagnosed with after my experience of hardship from mental illness, from that diagnosis, and then the hardships that kind of eventually kind of gradually start coming in after that, just because everything's so overwhelming. Really, it was in that period of time where these normalized everyday things that were part of my regular experience with my especially with my dad. That's when those things became painful for me. And so, for example, if I didn't give the dog water, which I was made responsible early on for taking care of the dog, and I just kind of took that responsibility, positive minded, when I was younger. And then I was like, at the period years later, my dog's like 10 years old, 13 years old, whatever, and whatever his age was, I think it was like he died at 13 actually, so probably like 9 or 10 years old. There'd be days where my dad just would get so upset that the backyard, there was poop everywhere. He would get upset that he was trying to go in the backyard and then he stepped on poop. He'd get furious. And then he would wake me up. Sometimes he would wake me up in the morning, like, much earlier than what my normal schedule was for my school time. And he would wake me up early and just kind of, unload his emotional anger towards me in the form of, saying there's shit everywhere. You have to clean that shit up. And, that's just, you haven't even cleaned the dog. I guess I have to take care of him now. And then he would do this guilt trip that would make me feel so bad. It's like he's taking away something from me that I, positively, like wanted in a positive sense as, being responsible. And so that really would hurt, and that would kind of be normal. And it's not just in the scope of cleaning the dog. It's a lot of different things, like maybe in context of kitchen, maybe leaving the dishes, maybe leaving a few dishes dirty in the kitchen or in the sink and not cleaning up. And why do I have to clean up your shit? Oh, I have to come home. I'm tired and I just want to cook, and I have to clean up your shit before I could do anything. And so there'd be that emotional baggage unloading on me, and that would always. Before I was diagnosed with mental illness, that was just something that made me feel bad. And it's not something that caused me to feel emotional distress. It made me feel pretty bad. But after diagnosed with mental illness and years of emotional, really difficult experience that I was challenged with, that stuff it didn't change. It was still kind of, regular, and it even became worse. And it was so hard. It would be painful for me to experience when my dad would say stuff that, was hurtful in that sense. So, like that brings me back to when I try to have a conversation with my dad. I was trying to have a rational conversation on the topic of not getting off my meds and stopping medication. And I try to start the conversation, the dialogue with my dad one time, and in a logical fashion. I want to have a conversation with you on this topic. I have been thinking about it for months. And before I could even say, after I mentioned about getting off medication, before I could even go one more word after that, my dad he threatened me in a way that really hurt, because it's kind of like I wasn't expecting that kind of, like, I don't know, I don't know how to put it to words. It really hurt. He said, and I had put a lot of energy. I'd like a year of learning about, this topic of, chemical model psychology versus trauma model psychology, and getting a lot of information on that through a YouTube channel called Psyche Truth Channel, and then learning about nutrition and how that has an effect on our mental state. And so that was, nutrition and lifestyle, getting off medication and trading it for these other things. That was kind of my conversation. But right the second when I mentioned getting off my medication, I couldn't say any more of all this other, path that I wanted to take. My dad just immediately said, he threatened me in a way that really hurt me to my core. And I just couldn't, what I thought to myself, and him saying that was, the thought that I had was that he just doesn't really realize, he doesn't realize it. He doesn't see what he's doing. And so he just doesn't realize. And so I remember like feeling this really strong pain, and just like for a second there, just like that's my mental dialogue. He just doesn't realize it. And so I just kind of, although the pain was intense, it was kind of like transitioned into kind of more of like maybe a kind of like a state, like a trance kind of mentality, like almost maybe not dazed, but just kind of like an in-between space where I wasn't feeling so bad, but I was still feeling bad, but I wasn't like feeling the intense hit of it. And so my dad said basically, in a reaction towards what I was starting to tell him, he said, "Mark, you cannot get off your medication. If you get off your medication, you cannot live at this house. You cannot be around your mom. You cannot live here. And I just want to make that clear for you. You cannot live here." And so like that was like, I'm thinking positively I'm thinking about my future, what I want. I'm feeling good about it. And then my dad just kind of, has, without hearing me out, without hearing the whole story, just kind of reacts to what I was starting to tell him. And that, I remember that hurt me so bad. Like, this is not my house. Like, ever since I was a kid, like, we made the decision, like, I was included in the decision to buy this house. My parents, they wanted us to be happy with it. And like, this is where I lived my whole life. And then now my dad is saying, you can't be here anymore. You have to leave. That hurt me so much. And so my dad just, I don't think he realizes it. I think also part of it too is that maybe part of his emotional disposition comes from his work, because he tends to hold management positions. And he, one time he started to do his own, try his own self-employment. And he was doing very well. And, but, kind of more recently, he was starting that up again. And so he was having a problem with one of his drivers, with one of his truck drivers. And I remember hearing him talk to my mom about how there was a conflict with a delivery, and the truck driver was to blame. And he was telling my mom, I remember this like really stuck with me. He said, sometimes you just have to slap them around a little bit, and then they'll understand. Because otherwise they just don't listen. They don't understand. They'll just keep on doing it. You have to really, you have to make them understand. And I just like, hearing my dad say that, it's just like, that's who my dad is. That's who my dad is. Like that's just, I don't know. I can't translate it to words. is just something that feels bad. And just like hearing that, and just kind of like, that's a lot of the mentality that I relate with how he treats me in things. And so that just really kind of got to me in my core, hearing him say that. And just in the back of my mind, I'm thinking my dad doesn't realize just how bad that is. He has no idea. He has, maybe it's that consciousness, that awareness aspect of it, that disassociation aspect of it, where we just become normalized to things and we don't realize just how bad those things potentially are. And from another person's perspective, we have no sense of perception. We only have our own individual focus on what we know and what we perceive around us. If people feel really bad, like maybe, how does my dad interpret it when he sees me feeling bad? I think also too, another component of this issue has to do with childhood discipline, where on a bigger scale, on a cultural, social level, it's kind of normalized for parents to be accepting towards the idea of their children experiencing a degree of, emotional, you need to fear this physical spanking, or you need to fear the emotional aspect of getting hurt. So the parents prospectively are engaging in this sense of, it's almost like they're using their children's sense of fear and pain to coerce the desired outcome. And so parents don't realize that they're using these really hurtful emotions, these things that hurt us, as a mechanism against us. They don't see it that way. And so even in psychology, generally, psychology is okay with spanking and disciplinary action, but it also, there's an asterisk there. There's a lot of unknowns. You need to practice this with caution, because there's a lot of things that we just don't know. And so even though it's safe, it's okay to, but there's still that potential for, we simply don't know. And so, it could be harmful. So practice it with caution. So yeah, my parents are first generation Americans. My grandparents came from different countries, and so I think that or they migrated from different countries. And so I think that, when people are immigrants, they're coming to America, I think that also plays a role in terms of like psychology on, their emotional state and how they perceive the world around them, and their sense of wanting to fit in and maybe taking things a little bit stronger than someone that is kind of normalized and kind of okay with things. They want to guarantee that they're going to fit into the new society. And so I don't know. I think it's more, I don't really know how to put it to words, but I think because I've heard someone else talk about that topic of their parents being immigrants and how some of their ways were coming from kind of like a situation of almost like scarcity, where they're coming from this, they're trying to, move away from this experience of scarcity and poverty, and or potential harm to themselves. And so they're kind of really functioning on a different sense. And so yeah. So maybe that, that's something that I was listening to someone on a podcast the other day, and she was talking about that and how she had gone to go see therapy, and in her therapy, she built a stronger degree of self-awareness, and she realized that, her parents should go to therapy too, because they're reinforcing a lot of stuff that's really actually harmful emotionally and psychologically, and so they need therapy too. And so she tried to convince them of that. But I think there's a pretty strong, in my experience, when I try to tell my parents an issue, and they're kind of, and they're also part of the problem, it's more offensive to them. They don't really see it from a sense of neutrality. And at least that's in my attempts to try to talk to my parents. It's kind of really hard to talk from a sense of neutrality, and so without feeling hurt by it. And so I think that's actually a reason why, I shouldn't be talking to them about this kind of stuff, that, they should talk to a therapist that's able to have, you know, a different sense of emotional sense towards them. And so yeah. Uh, I like that the podcast conversation. The lady, she was basically saying that she eventually made the decision because her parents didn't want to go see therapy. She made the decision with her therapist that, you know, her parents really caused her a lot of distress, and when she started taking taking a break from that she started feeling significantly better. And, you know, she tried to convince her parents of going to therapy, and because, you know, the way that they treat her, it really affects her negatively. And but they just kind of, you know, they're kind of almost in a sense stuck in their ways, or more so maybe just strongly offended and not able to, like, that's a significant emotional challenge, especially prospectively from someone that might be strongly disassociating from things that are emotionally challenging. And so it just kind of might reinforce that disassociation, kind of uh, 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 like it's like a habit, I guess, or it just eventually becomes like something automatic. You don't really think about it; it's just kind of automatic. So yeah, disassociation, it becomes automatic. So yeah, she said that she just had to make the decision to kind of I guess remove her parents from her life, and because it's just like kind of a cycle, and it's a vicious cycle. And that just, hearing that makes me feel really like it's not such a positive thing. It really hurts. And so because like ultimately separation is something, especially from people that, you know, are your family, that's something that that just hurts. It hurts, especially like as being a kid, and you know, like having that bond, child bond with your parents, and that's always there. That doesn't go away. And so you know, I think there's a aspect of self that will always be hurt in context of that kind of stuff. And so um, yeah, I don't know. I kind of don't like to do things in like the normal sense of like, you know, maybe a doctor recommends thing. I kind of like to take things in my own way that fit me better. And but what I'm finding, it's really hard to take that first step towards like going to see a doctor, just because of all the bad experiences I've already had with psychology, and just kind of I already have developed that emotional disposition and context of there, and it's really hard with everything to even be able to say anything. Some of my first psychologist appointments were like the best ever. Like I was having a really hard time putting towards stuff. I couldn't even talk. I didn't know how to describe it back then, but now I have the word to describe it. It's called selective mutism. You can't talk. It's just like you feel like the sense of heavy feeling of just like stuck. You just can't. Nothing comes out, and you have all this your sense of self there, but when it comes out, it's just all it's silence. You can just, and it's also, it just doesn't come out right. It's just it's off. And so there was a breakthrough I had with that doctor, and it was on a topic um, that really kind of reinforced what I truly wanted, which was to not take medication. And so I was having a conversation with her on the topic of how doctors tend to overly medicate, and just like kind of like the big pharma mentality that people tend to typically have. And she was totally like just, and also too, my personal experience was like kind of different than the stereotype. And it was a really bad experience I had, my personal experience. And so I just kind of was talking on that topic with her. I just felt so natural, and I didn't have that speech impediment anymore. I didn't feel stuck, and my sense of self was completely different in that visit with the doctor. And I was really surprised when I heard very next time my appointment I had with her that she had decided to leave the practice. I almost thought like she was just trying to not be my patient anymore or not be my doctor anymore, because there was a degree of anger that we experienced in that conversation, and it felt there's a sense of inappropriateness that I experienced in having those feelings present there. And so, like, I was just thinking from that perspective, maybe like it was just it was wrong, and she just doesn't want to see me. But recently I was looking back at that, and I just like in the bigger scope of everything, and I realized, just I was able to think about it from the other side of the story, where that was a really strong conversation I had with her, and it was it became more possible that was the reason why she wasn't there anymore. It was like legitimately they weren't lying; they were actually telling me, not just shrugging me off. I think part of my mentality, it's not so much comes from a sense of paranoia, but more so a sense of my experience with working in a profession. So like working in an automotive store, we oftentimes had that mentality of kind of secrecy between the employees ourselves and the customers. And oftentimes if we had something to say, we would just, and it was relating to like loss prevention, we were instructed to speak openly about it amongst ourselves, even if the employee was right in front of us. And so, but our manager told us just they don't have to know what you're talking about. So it created this like sense of separation from what we're thinking versus what the customer is actually thinking. This kind of sense of deception that was there. And so the thing is, though, that kind of turned into kind of an overly dramatized focus on visual appearances. So if someone looked like they hadn't taken a shower for a few days, like we would look at that person and just, that guy, oh, he hadn't taken a shower for a few days. Take a look at, like, keep an eye on him. But that doesn't mean that they're going to steal anything. It's just they haven't taken a shower for a few days. And so it turned into that. It turned into kind of like focusing on things, maybe someone's style or stuff that was visually standing out, a part of like the norm. And when I went back into my old work after I was diagnosed with mental illness, and I just had a very different disposition towards the world around me, very, very, very different. And so most definitely that emotional sense, people identify with that. And so walking into the store, like I heard them like, kind of singling me out, just like I remember my experience working for them. And that really hurt, to have someone just kind of like focus on you just because you look different or you're emotionally, there's something different about you. And so I tried to talk about that. I knew that they were talking about me because I had experienced that. That was normal working at that job. We would always do that. And I remember trying to go to my doctor to have that full conversation, but I couldn't have the conversation. I started off with, so some people in a place that I used to work, I walked in there the other day and I heard them talking about me, and I was kind of like kind of escalating with overwhelming feeling in the process of communicating to my doctor. Usually when I was communicating with my doctor, I would experience that. And so that was something that kind of prompted me to kind of be very selective of the things that I would communicate with my doctor. And so there's a barrier of communication that was there. And from my perspective, that's a very common, normal barrier that exists between people with schizophrenia and their doctors. I think it comes with the territory. It's actually very hard to accept something as different than what you initially perceive it as. So like if you experience something and you know what you're experiencing, you experience it, you feel it, it speaks to you on maybe a level of religious experience, and then a doctor comes and tells you, no, that's not that, that's this. Like, it's really hard to accept that. Religion in my experience was part of, Saturdays, maybe Saturdays, Sundays. And so that was with my grandparents, and, go to church pretty much every Sunday growing up. My dad never really went to church with us, just me, my mom, and my sister, my grandpa. And so that was normal. And so kind of, just being normalized to this idea of religious experiences that happen on occasion. Not all the time, but just, that's something that's part of the experience of, being a Christian, potentially. And so, to believe in the things that are extraordinary and to view the world as greater than what it might appear to be. I guess those are like fundamentals of, Christianity. But also, there's a lot more to it, that I feel twist the perception quite a bit and that I don't agree with. And mostly I'm thinking about like fear-based, God-fearing Christians, kind of that type of belief. I much less believe in that kind of thing than the other side of the spiritual side of it. So yeah, just religion is, something that culturally has existed for thousands of years, and, it's part of the family unit. It's part of how we're raised as kids. And it's normal. And, to say that, if someone experiences something that they perceive in all their senses, it fits all those boxes of that's part of a spiritual experience. That's a religious experience. It fits all those boxes. It's just like the content that we're exposed to, the stories that we hear from the Bible. If you experience something that on that level, that's the religion. That's something that from your core. That's what you experienced. And so, realistically also too, that's not something that was like a foundational reason for me being hospitalized. The reason I was hospitalized is there's my first hospitalization with a psychiatric hospital. There's actually a significant twist to the story. Although that religious experience had occurred, but it was, maybe a week prior. And so I think that also too, making assumptions based on the content of what you are perceiving. I think it's normal to make maybe premature assumptions, especially in context of things that are well understood. And so like the diagnostics, you check all those, those checks, and that fits under that box. I think reality is there's a lot more to it than maybe even what people could communicate openly. So I'm from my sense, I'm saying that there's a limited sense of perception towards, what we're able to interpret as part of the world around us from a scientific medical sense. And it's also, that is also colored by the social biases that exist. So for example, there's this YouTube, very, very old footage of someone that was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I think it's like 60 years old or something like that. 1970s or something, like 1968 or something, 1965. I don't know, it's pretty old. And the guy's a pianist, and he's in the hospital, and he's being interviewed by one of the hospital workers or some interviewer guy. And you could kind of get the gist of the some of the components of his story. Like, for example, he does have a demeanor or an appearance of kind of more towards being gay, by how he holds himself, by maybe by how his posture, maybe by how he communicates. And so, being gay back in the 50s, there was a significant social stigma that's there. And even now, people, being called a fag is kind of a commonly used put down that in my experience of high school was used all the time. It's just like if someone wanted to hurt your feelings, you call them a fag. And so yeah, there's just, there's a common sense. there's a common cultural dislike that exists there, and it's very much amplified. So back in the 1950s, way worse. People, if you had any sense of being homosexual, that was a significant challenge in of itself. And so yeah, there's a sense that that's part of that guy's experience. You kind of get a hint of it there in the interview, and or the potential for it there. And even if he isn't, what people interpret or what people perceive from their own sense, how they interpret him, that's they could, maybe a lot of people interpret him like that, and that's where he's experiencing a lot of these emotional challenges come from. It's not him as an individual experiencing psychotic symptoms. It's because he's experiencing a lot of cultural, social disapproval, maybe from his parents, and so that has an effect, and a strong emotional effect, and so he's being hospitalized, and that seems like it's something that is something that you might want to look further into as being a researcher, a scientist. But that's an older interview, 50, 60 years old, and so you're probably not going to be able to ask some questions to that person. You might not even be alive anymore. I think the average life expectancy back in those times was like 55 years old or something like that. I think the average life expectancy in 1980s, it went up to 65 years old. And now, like, our life expectancy is like 70. It's gone down a little bit because of the prevalence of certain diseases, but it's still reasonably high. It's like 80s if if you have relatively stable life, you have the ability to eat nutritious foods. 80 is kind of like the average in that sense of that type of demographic. Overall, in general, in our society, the average, I think, for males is like 73 or something like that. So that usually people that are more socioeconomically challenged, they can't really afford to eat a lot of a variety of a free diet. They're kind of limited in their options. Maybe they had they didn't have really good maybe they didn't have opportunities to learn, go to school and study and become knowledgeable. And so there's a lot of factors that play into the end result of how long or the quality of someone's life. Also to their mindset, their perception of the world around them, that plays a huge role in overall their mental health and physical health. And so overall, in general, in our society, to mix in all those variations of different experiences together, the average is like 73 or something like that, 74 for men, and then women live on average longer than men. About I think it's like 78 or so is the average life expectancy, and so yeah. All this time I'm walking on a treadmill desk, and this is something that I wanted to focus on in this video, but I just I'm focusing on. I just wanted to talk really, and I like how this conversation, the direction that it went, and so this is my treadmill, my walking treadmill desk. My mom helped me buy this. This is a sit-stand desk. It has ability to be set at different heights, and so when I'm tired of walking, usually I'll just, if I'm more tired, going through a little bit more tiredness in my life, I'll just put the chair on top of this thing. And this chair is pretty heavy, but when I have more energy in my life, like if I'm more consistent with my diet and my lifestyle and my sleep qualities, going through a phase where I'm feeling a little bit better or relief, then I have a little bit more energy. I just don't feel so. I kind of go back and forth, and so sometimes I'll just it's not so hard to just unplug it and roll it out and set it on the wall right there. And that gives, like, if I really want to have a nice chair sitting experience, I'll do that. when I'm more motivated for that. But yeah, this is a walking treadmill. This is specifically meant for this desk. It's designed for this desk. It has automatic shut off. So if I get off of it, if it's over, I think 1 mile per hour, and I step off of it, it'll turn off by itself. And so yeah, I have some features there. My desk is this is my desk, and so I don't want to say that it's cluttered, because those thoughts of relating to keeping things organized and clean, for me, I experience physical pain. I'm reluctant to call it physical discomfort, because for me, I have a lot of painful experiences in my life, and it just thinking about it kind of brings that up. And so I don't think about it in general, but if I say, like, for this video in general, like for YouTube audiences, my desk looks like a mess. Sorry, excuse my mess. I don't want to say that. I didn't want to say that, because just immediately thinking about that, I have a different association with what that experience is like for me. And so yeah, this is my this is the speed control. And so I have over here sockets, a nice power cube there. This is one thing that I really spent a lot of money on, which is the sound system. And I did that specifically because I did that for audible hallucinations. So hearing stuff like hearing voices or hearing something said through a sound system or a song, or like watching something on YouTube. In its worst, I could watch like a seminar or some kind of conference video, someone's a guest speaker. And if I'm listening in a certain way, the whole thing, it's like, it's I don't know how to put it towards. So audio hallucination, so where you hear something that's not really there, but you hear it kind of like almost on a sub level of the conversation. And so that could be actually very, very, very hard for me to experience. That was something that's very painful for me to focus on. So what I found though is that speakers, like if I'm listening to through this monitor speakers, if I'm trying to watch like some news channel or something and really trying to listen to everything that's being said, I will miss a few words just because of the way that these speakers sound. There's a little bit of distortion, especially if I turn it up a little bit more. And it's hard to perceive spoken word. And so usually when I have difficulties perceiving spoken word, that usually kind of gets my gears. Like, what did I hear? I don't know how to put it I don't know how to put it differently. It's kind of a little bit draining to kind of feel like I'm degrading my experience a little bit for the sake of communicating it. So yeah, audio clarity, that's why I got this. And so in my recent experience, past couple of years, this has audio clarity has really changed my overall experience with what I perceive. It helps me really hear the details of what the audio track is playing. And so that will really kind of, instead of thinking I heard something, or something sounding like one word sounding like a different word, or sounding kind of muddled or not very clear, having a high quality sound system, really that extra degree of clarity, that in my experience, that has helped me steer away from hearing those kind of audible hallucinations. And so also too, I decided to spend a little bit more on a sound bar for my TV, and that really makes a difference for spoken word, for audio clarity. And so I don't hear any more uncertain things, or something I thought I heard from a movie, where all of a sudden, then in hearing enough of that kind of stuff and watching a movie, that will really change the sense of the movie for me. And that could, that changes whether I want to watch a movie or not. Like, I took a break from TV and sound for a period of time, And there was a relief that I experienced, and not having to go through that experience. Even though it was actually positive at the time, it wasn't so much negative voices anymore. It was more so like positive voices. But even that didn't feel quite right. There was a sense of discomfort that I was experiencing. So I decided just to take a break from listening to music and TV. And so for a period, I was just kind of living in my room, like kind of like a monk would live in a monastery, practicing a different type of lifestyle. And so that really helped. That really helped a lot. Just like the relief of not experiencing something that was associated with a lot of emotional distress in my past, or the potential of it being there, not being there, just because I'm not hearing it anymore. And so, yeah, at least one source I could eliminate it from. Maybe I might not eliminate it from hearing my parents downstairs from a distance, and then thinking they're saying something else, or a word sounds differently, or the whole conversation sounds like a different conversation. That I haven't experienced that actually so much at all. In more recent times, it's almost a bit distant now from my sense of where I am now. There's another thing that I used to experience with taking a shower. And I came to realize there was an emotional distress that I was experiencing at the time when I first started hearing the voice, and the voice kind of persisted, and the distress, the reason for it, I guess, kind of I forgot about it. But yeah, I used to hear a voice from the drain, the sound of the water going down the drain. It would make like maybe a gurgly noise. Sometimes the sound of a drop of water hitting a hard surface might sound like a T sound, like t, t. And then so like there might be like a S sound from like the stream of water. And so with all those like, letter sounds, to really kind of think about it differently, it's almost like, in a sense, like, so like say the word face, and then like spell it FACE, and then say the word face, phase, phase, face, phase. I guess it's so like you hear it, it sounds very, so face and face, face and phase. I guess there's a Z to it. I don't know. So, but it's, I don't know. I wanted to say it's kind of like uh hearing a word from a different sense of it, where it might be the same word, but you think about it from a different perception. Um, and so I don't know how to say it. So like sounds from the world around me, I don't generally see those as like mouth sounds. They're just sounds that are in the world around me. And so kind of identifying those sounds from the sense that they're, letter sounds, it's kind of a different, it gave a different sense of the world. Like I just remembered there was our laundry door, and this is also a situation relating to cleaning, but the laundry door, it would have a squeak to it sometimes, and in opening it up at a certain slowness or speed, it would make an E sound, like E, like strong E, and like that. And there's a emotional tone to the E as well. And so I've thought maybe, so there's a sense of like how I'm pulling it open. Maybe I'm kind of a little bit tired, and I'm pulling it open with that sense of emotional, I don't know, down to it. And it's at that lower, slower frequency that I'm hearing the E, and that gives the sense of it being more like of a depressed E tone, like someone saying E. Like I don't know. People don't say E, I guess, maybe in Spanish, or from a different, maybe like cartoons might say it, like when they get hurt or something like that. Characters from a cartoon. But yeah, I don't know. So that was actually, I would get some hateful words coming together out of all those sounds that would come together. Like, so sounds from like water splashing into the laundry, I would get like a hate word in the like the accumulation of all the sounds. And it just, it really kind of, I think it was like hate or something like that. And that kind of hearing that in context of already feeling bad because maybe my parents were upset or my dad got upset when I said that I was starting to wash my clothes more frequently, and they were really upset that I was using that much water because the water bill was so high, and I was trying to help them figure out what was the problem. And so I just kind of not realizing that saying that I was using the water more often, I didn't realize it would result in me getting scolded so harshly from my parents. And but from their perspective, I don't think that they would view it in the same sense as harsh scolding. It just kind of has a sense of, well, I was using the water, too much water. And so there's like this sense of justification that my parents would have, that they wouldn't really view it from the sense of like being made to feel bad. It's just like that's their emotional sense, I guess, that they would have. So if my parents watched my video and they kind of hear this for the first time, they would not really associate it with something that's real. They would say, well, that's part of Mark's, imagination, or his delusions that he has that are not real. And but yeah, the water bill was super high, and I was trying to help my parents figure out why. It was like $600, and eventually I found out why it was so high. And I remember feeling more reluctant to really express to them what I discovered, and it was the back. But I think I ended up doing it anyways. And so it was the backyard. I installed another faucet, a more quicker flowing water control nozzle, so that I could fill up my dog's water bucket faster. And also, I could bypass the hose because the hose was also not very good. It said, do not drink out of the hose. So why should I feed my water out of a hose? So yeah, I started to use this high flow water nozzle, and I didn't install it properly, and it was leaking a little bit, and I left it to leak, I guess, and that hurts me a little bit to think about that. I feel a sense of physical pain. I feel it like in my chest. It hurts, but it's overall bodily. It's like a bodily pain, and I get a visual. I remember uh, uh, there was grass. The grass all around that area was really super green. I was like, oh, that's so nice seeing it. So I think that was like part of me just like leaving it drip as like an experiment to see what would happen. Um, and so yeah, it wasn't only about wasting water. It was like a combination of a lot of different things coming together. So my getting scolded because of my dog, and then trying to fix that by in kind of looking into the water issue, learning about the hoses, or at least taking it more seriously, that hoses aren't really intended for drinking out of, and so kind of taking things a little bit more seriously. And so that was like a positive thing that I did for my dog. And then all of a sudden, and in context of like you being scolded by my dad because of the dog not being cared for, that's there already emotionally. And then now there's that problem with the drip, and then my parents are upset at that. It just kind of like builds on top of each other. It's like it becomes this overwhelming sense where it's unbearable, and I just can't really handle it. And then so like the next time I go to wash the laundry or something like that, like there's that voice that's there. It's this really hateful voice, and it hurts to wash my laundry. And so yeah, like my parents have a significant influence from what I'm perceiving, from how I'm kind of piecing everything together. I could see how my parents, in hindsight, I'm able to think about this. Not so much when I'm going through it. Everything's overwhelming. I can't think of anything when I'm going through it. And so, but in hindsight, and while I'm going through it, I know there's a sense of wrong that's there, but I can't really express it. I just feel like this sense that it's just like, it's like everything's normal. It's like everything's the way that it's supposed to be. I'm taking my medication. I'm supposed to be hearing voices, and my parents aren't really responsible for the psychotic disorder. And, that's what doctors say and stuff like that, that it's not as a result of, bad parenting or something like that. But, I think in general, science, for the sake of leaning on the side that where, if you lean on the side where there's less consequence, but that side of less consequence, there's still knowns that are there. You don't want to lean on the side where potential, or if you start telling people, yeah, parenting is the result of this trauma, and then you start kind of reinforcing the sense of, the sense of degradation towards the parent mentality, and then maybe that affects parents, and that it maybe decays overall circumstances even more. So I think for the sake of kind of maintaining a sense of positive morality, doctors tend to lean on the side where it's more psychologically healthy for people. But still, there's unknowns. That is kind of a universal truth, that there's a lot of unknowns, especially on the individual level. You don't really know what the individual story is. And so when you're making a broad statistical kind of um, uh, analysis of the overall sense of things, you can't really include the personal individual experience in that sense. So because individually things are different. So yeah, psychologists say that, doctors are not, or that that bad parenting isn't the result of mental illness. But from my experience, there's some pretty strong things that are associated with my experience worsening, or at least the worsening of my experience with mental illness, or the occurrence of it from the start. Um, I don't know how to really word this. Um, so yeah, the laundry, that was very painful to experience for a long period of time, actually, and so eventually it's just kind of there. Sometimes it's not there so much. I haven't really experienced any of that with the laundry. I was experiencing a lot of pain in kind of the past years, coinciding in context with doing things in the laundry. I've also been experiencing pain in other areas of my life when it comes to kitchen and preparing my alternative plant-based meals, and then cleaning up. Usually, it would be common for me to experience physical pain in the process of the mentality of that I have to keep everything perfectly clean from when my parents get here, and because a lot of that too is reinforced with my parents being upset if they see things, like if they see water. One time my dad, like, there was water sprayed all across the kitchen, and my dad was like, why is there water all the way over here? While I'm in the kitchen, I'm experiencing regularly, being scolded by my parents from in different ways, from ranging from like leaving a mess on the counter or not cleaning up after myself in the kitchen and leaving the kitchen a mess. So when they get there, it's just like they have to clean all up my mess, and then they just get upset over that. And then so there's that's kind of regularly in the atmosphere. So when it comes to cleaning, that's always kind of there. And so it comes with pain to start engaging in something that's associated with feeling really bad. It has a lot of really strong associations with my past experiences of feeling bad. And it really has a strong effect on me. It really does. And I'm not really able to communicate with my parents from my personal experience of it. It's really, there's a sense of kind of like this barrier that exists where I can't really communicate some things. And actually recently I've been experiencing that barrier from a different perspective, from the sense of politics, and realistically that barrier has kind of always existed there, where there becomes a point where maybe we, in the process of having a conversation around politics, someone or another starts to say, okay, let's just drop the conversation, let's focus on something else now, so let's not think about it. So it's not so much politics as it's the fact that we can't really agree on certain things. We have conflicting perspectives. And so for me, my mentality around cleaning was, or it eventually evolved to be, it's okay, I don't have to focus on cleaning it. If I start experiencing physical pain, discomfort, and I'm continuing to clean through that physical pain and it's hurting me more. Why can't I just stop? Why can't I just take a break and go do something else and go focus on something else and come back to it when I'm not feeling so overwhelmed by everything? And, sometimes I'd go out for long, long walks. I'd just feel so great walking for hours and hours, like 2 or 3 hours, being physically active regularly. And I come back home and then I clean it. And it's not a big deal. And so that was becoming part of my regular experience. And so not forcing myself to continue to experience something if I don't have to. And that mentality played a huge role in kind of steering myself into a different emotional direction, a different direction where just things weren't, I wasn't making myself more overwhelmed than I had to be. And so actually that really made all the difference. And from my mental illness perspective, where I'm experiencing mental illness from a level of 7 or 8, really extreme, taking that simple action and incorporating it to pretty much everything that was causing me emotional distress, and just taking a break. Just stop. Why do I have to continue it if it's hurting me? Just stop. And so, turn it all the way down to 2. And I'm so much better. And so, but there's a caveat to doing that. And so sometimes maybe I would leave the kitchen a mess and I wasn't able to get back to it. Or when I finally got back to the kitchen, which was actually the more common situation, I would get back to the kitchen. My parents were already there and I was feeling relief. And then my parents would just kind of really be upset over, they were preparing to make this meal after they got home from work, and they were looking forward to it, and now they get to the kitchen and it's all a mess because I'm putting a lot of energy in doing this and learning how to cook differently, and make foods from a plant-based diet. I spent a lot of time trying to learn things and just kind of getting the hang of how to prepare stuff just through experience. And so they get home and they would just be really upset, and my parents' mentality would be like, why can't you just clean it? And so that would hurt me. That would hurt me so much. And they just don't realize it. I couldn't communicate it to them. Like in the process of trying to explain, there's no excuses. Just why? And so they just don't understand it. They couldn't understand it. And so it's still the situation. I try to communicate with them just more kind of like, the more I do it, the better I get at it, even though it's not working out. The communication part of it's not working out. The more I do it, kind of like the more familiar it becomes. And they have a little tiny, I would say like 2%, a little bit more accommodation, being able to accommodate my kind of sense. And they don't really have the capacity just to kind of like hear me out for what I'm trying to say, especially if I'm hurt and I'm trying to say you're hurting me, or that really, like, they can't even hear that. Like, how would they be hurting me because of them talking about something so little, or I don't know how to really express it from their point of view. And so yeah, that really like would make me feel like I just So I don't know. I thought my parents were here just now, and I don't want to have them hear me talking about this stuff, just because that sense that I'm kind of expressing, that they interpret things differently. They don't realize that communication, even though it sounds like I'm saying a whole bunch of negative stuff from their perspective, it's actually not. It's actually very positive. And so if they're able, I hope they're able at some time in their life to be able to have the capacity to kind of see it differently. I don't think I could communicate it with them so easily. I think it's sometimes the better communication that I have with them, or the times where I'm better able to communicate some of my personal experiences that are like the spiritual side. Sometimes, like one time in particular, it was kind of like I wasn't really experiencing any, I was kind of in a positive set, and I was able to kind of communicate it from more of in a way that my dad was able to kind of really kind of see it from that sense. And so it's really hard to communicate stuff no, that's very personal, and to say it from your personal sense, you kind of have to say it in a way that it's more understandable. And actually, that's I think when it comes to like law, that's like sometimes not saying something is really important because people just inherently have, this great capacity for misinterpretation, and that could really create a lot of conflict when it comes to legal problems. So when it comes to law, they actually have like accommodation for not speaking about certain things. Like you don't say it in those ways. It's okay. You don't have to. Um, and so yeah, and also too, when you say stuff that is perceived differently, everyone sees it differently than how you intended it. It makes you sound like guilty, but in reality, there's a lot more to it, and people just don't have the capacity to see it from that personal sense. They see it from their external to your personal sense, and they just kind of judge you based on their expectations. It's kind of like I watched, I was hearing something said yesterday about people that couples that went to a psychologist in the very beginning. If you were a psychologist that was divorced and you had patients come to you, couples come to you for help, and usually the psychologist that was the divorce psychologist, their result would be having more of their patients end up divorced. And then alternatively, the psychologist that was married, their end result would eventually lead to the majority of their patients would stay married. And so there's this like kind of this personal bias that was solely relating to the medical practitioner, where their personal experience really colored the outcome of what their patients experienced. And so I thought that was pretty intriguing to hear that. I don't really like to use the word intriguing. There's a lot of pain overall in this atmosphere of this conversation, and intrigue. It just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. There's a lot of imbalance in the sense of uh, uh, kind of saying stuff or not being able to say something, and just it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel in balance with my overall sense of things. And I find that it's actually it's maybe some doctors, they might practice a sense of kind of, you don't have to listen to your every thought. They're just thoughts. But I don't really like listening to those doctors. I like listening to the doctors that have the perception of kind of more open-mindedness, where you don't really know maybe like the foundation or the reasons behind how you're thinking. It could be something much more complex. And so for that sake, maybe a sense of self-acceptance, working from a sense of being able to accept your thoughts and what you think, and working from a sense of self-acceptance versus a sense of self-denial. I think there's a lot of merit in taking your psychological health from a sense of self-acceptance, especially from a cultural level. In general, religion tends to teach us like kind of this lesson of like kind of deny yourself. You're inherently bad, and so deny all your bad aspects because they're all forgiven. You don't have to worry about it. Just deny it. It doesn't have to exist. And so I think, the psychology to that, it does. I like self-awareness over self-denial. I don't know. That's kind of just a little bit contrived to say it like that. I don't know what word to use, but yeah, it's um, I think overall ignorance is something that has been very common throughout history, and it's still very much inherent in our current society. People, although 500 or 1,000 years have passed, who we are on a psychological level, nothing has really changed. We're still pretty much the same. We have the same makeup, emotional makeup. Maybe there's just more knowledge that's kind of behind that makeup. And so, but still, we're human. Evolution takes a very, very long time. And so likely that, psychological evolution, sure, it might happen more rapidly than we might expect. But, I think that, it takes a very, very long time for there to be significant changes, maybe even like physical changes to our brain to occur in order for there to be like a cognitive change. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of ranting. I used to like that word, but I don't like it now so much at all.